Hi to everyone at Sugarscape, I'm Bali Rai and we're going to be talking about my new book, Killing Honour.
Hi Bali. So, honour killings and honour-based violence, why was this an issue that you wanted to talk about?
It's something that I'd already partly written about in a book called Rani and Suk and another one called Unarranged Marriage, so it was, my early work had kind of touched on it, and what I wanted to do was round it all up and bring in a story, basically a story that I'd read many years ago that upset me about a lady called Kiranjit Ahluwalia who'd been sent to prison for defending herself against an abusive husband, and also the many cases that I know about within the British Asian community, including some in my own family. So there was a mix of sort of anger and interest and a sort of wanting to get that, because everyone talks about honour killings, very few people understand what the concept of honour actually means and what drives these killings. So I wanted to sort of take that apart a bit and talk about the concept of honour.
Okay, so it's sort of based on your own experiences, or was it more inspired by the statistics that are in the book?
It's pretty much half and half. I mean, there are 3 incidences that I can think of off the top of my head in my own family, in my extended family, plus countless others that I've read about. When I researched my first novel, Unarranged Marriage, there were so many that I came to. I went to Sweden in 2002 and there was a big issue around honour killings. There was a case going on, so it's always been around. So what I did was basically combine the thoughts that I had, the kind of ideas that were going through my head with the sort of current focus on it. Although when I started writing this, it wasn't as big the focus, but thankfully in the last year or so, it's actually, since I started writing it, it's actually grown. The focus seems to be growing, and a lot more, particularly sort of politicians, are getting involved, which is an important thing.
And what's honour meant to traditionally symbolise, and how do you think it's been skewed, and what do you think it represents now?
Well, the concept of honour is sounds strange, but it's complex. But it depends on what side of the argument you come from. I mean, there are very honourable things about being British and Asian. I come from a Punjabi Sikh background, and Sikhs on the whole are quite honourable. But then it's about, for me, the concept that the problem with honour killings is that the concept of honour isn't about equality or men and women. It's about male members of particular families who want to uphold their reputations, their family name, and their concept of honour is basically bound up with their reputation within a village or a community or a city, and anyone that has anything, does anything that sort of takes away from that can become subject to sort of honour-based violence, and in its extreme form, murder. So it's an interesting one. It's kind, I've been thinking about this for about 6 months now, and what is honour? And I think in terms of honour killings, if we're going to base it just on the concept of honour killings, it's basically about men exercising brute power over women and the women in their families and lives. So.
And there's a lot of anger in the book through Sat's voice. Was this your own anger coming through?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, this is something I've been thinking about, or I thought about when I started writing. I was going to tone it down a bit because I realised quickly that Sat's anger is my own, and I was worried that might affect how readers felt about him or felt about the story. But when I finished it, I let it go and left it that way. And when I finished it and read it back, and particularly when my editor at Random House read it, it just reads really well. And I think if we took the anger out of it, it wouldn't be right. The story wouldn't be right. So there's a lot of me in Sat, which I'm quite, normally that would bother me, but I'm actually quite pleased about it this time around. So.
And why did you decide to do the novel through a male voice rather than a female voice?
I don't know. I mean, I actually really love writing as a teenage female. I've done it twice now with novels, and I really enjoy doing it. But there was something about, I wanted to show that not all British Asian men have these sort of feelings. I don't have this honour code where I would beat my sister if she wore a short skirt, and Sat doesn't have that either. And then there's this whole thing about sort of, he wants to know what's happened to his sister, and that kind of emotional side of the whole thing, where he's not bothered who she's run off with, he's not bothered what she's done. She's his sister and he loves her and he wants to make sure she's alright. And I wanted to add that layer to it too, so it becomes about human relationships and familial relationships. And to be honest, it is easier, because I used to be a 15-year-old boy, so I was a 16-year-old boy, so writing from that point of view, it's kind of second nature. It's about, getting into his head was quite easy to do. So.
And I think one of the hardest parts to understand in the book is how the family can so quickly abandon their own daughter. Was that quite a difficult subject to put across?
Not really, because it's happened on at least, like I said, on at least 3 occasions that I know of in my own family over the years, and there's probably more. I mean, if I say anything, there'll be more, but 3 in particular that I can come to me as soon as I think about it. And it happens a lot. I mean, I've seen so many times, so many situations where families are willing to blame the female rather than the female. It's not just about young women who haven't been married yet. This is about divorce as well. I had an aunt who left an abusive husband, and half of my family automatically stopped talking to my aunt, not to the abusive husband, to the aunt. And one of my uncles actually said to me, well, she probably deserved it. And that, you know, that kind of, that, we were talking about anger in the last question, that's where a lot of the anger comes from as well. So, yeah, it's, you know, I hate to say that this is something that happens a lot more than people realise, because it sounds scary, but the whole concept for me is scary, and the fact that it happens in the UK, you know, it is happening a lot more than we know about. So.
And do you think there's a generation gap on issues, kind of how they're interpreted by the younger generation, how they're interpreted by the older generation?
Yeah.
Like a different idea? Do you think it's getting any better with the younger generation, or is it just coming down from the parents?
I think there's more people in this new generation in Britain who are not willing to put up with it. So there are more females who are not willing to put up with it. But the problem is if you look at the British Asian community, it's not uniform. If you break it down, and it's not just British Asians now either, lots of other new communities, but if you take a girl from a Hindu background, and usually a lot of girls from sort of Punjabi Sikh backgrounds, and compare their Muslim counterparts, what you're going to find is that you're going to have the Hindu girls are going to have a lot more freedom than the Sikh and the Muslim girls. The Sikh girls will probably have a little bit more freedom than the Muslim girls, and that is not, I'm not taking that off the top of my head. That's something I see, and it's been happening ever since I was young. The problem is, I don't think it's a generation gap, I think it's an education gap. I think the more people are educated, the better educated a family is, the more likely they are to turn against these kind of traditional sort of custom sort of based issues. But the less educated they are, the more likely they are to cling on to the past and to a culture that probably doesn't really exist in vast parts of, well, certainly in the cities of India and Pakistan or Bangladesh anymore either. This is a real tribal, rural custom thing, custom that happens. So, yeah, I think things are changing, but I think the figures are also quite scary still. You know, when you're talking an estimate of 17,000 a year, we're not doing enough. And that's just the British Asian community. If you add domestic abuse generally towards women and men, but towards women across the UK, it's an epidemic, and it's something that I think we don't pay enough attention to. So.